Today we're talking about the transition from Oracle EBS to cloud, as well as the impact that that has on our risk reporting that we do. So our objectives today will be to discuss those different approaches that you can take to transition from Oracle Cloud to EBS. That includes an incremental transition and implementation of net new components of Oracle Cloud. Preston, maybe I'm getting a little bit of background noise. We may want to mute that, or Stephanie, if we can check if we've got anyone unmuted. And additionally, we'll talk about just a net new Big Bang cutover to Oracle Cloud as well. Then we'll move on to recommendations for managing and reducing cross-application risk, both efficiently and reliably, regardless of which transition plan that you choose to take. So that's kind of our agenda for today. We'll introduce who we are, why we're speaking on this. We'll talk about why you may be wanting to make this transition to the cloud, what you may stand to benefit from that, the different transition approaches that you can take that we see customers taking every day, and the pros and cons of those. So to help you kind of decide what may be the best approach for you, then we'll level set to discuss, what is risk, how do we manage risk, and how do we especially manage risk in the midst of projects like this that are major undertakings where we still need to be compliant and we still need to be aware of our risk environment. But we've got a more complex environment while doing that transition. And then I'll hand it over at that point to Preston, who will jump in and show, how a solution like Pathlock Cloud can manage that kind of transition for you in that risk environment overview. And then we'll wrap it up. So that's kind of the plan for today. And with that said, I should introduce myself. I'm Carrie Bowman. I am our Senior Director of Product Marketing, and I do also have my CISA. I've got 14 years experience leading risk and governance management program implementations. So I spent a lot of time in consulting before moving over to the software side of the house. And in particular, I specialized in performance improvements initiatives, as well as risk analysis, rule set customization. That's really what I specialize in, is user access security. Preston, do you want to introduce yourself?
So thanks, Carrie, very much. My name's Preston Leftwich, and for the previous 20 or so years before starting work here with Pathlock, I had implemented a lot of the application stacks that we're talking about as a implementation manager, project manager, and functional consultant. So conversely, what I bring to the table from a conversation side is that we can talk about the things that go along as you transition from one ERP to another, considerations that you take into place, and some of the pitfalls you might avoid, and some that we can help you avoid as you make the transition to something completely different. So thanks very much, Carrie. I'll let you go on with the show.
Perfect. So as I mentioned, we're just going to jump right in and start with who we are. So why are Preston and I here talking to you about this today? So Pathlock is a market leader in application governance, risk, and compliance. And I mentioned that I have my CISO. We actually have a team of certified auditors that work for the company. And we also have, the foremost application experts. So Preston's mentioned he's got 20 plus years experience when it comes to JDE, Oracle. I myself have 16 years experience when it comes to SAP. We have similar other experienced application experts for the various different major ERP systems and applications that we integrate with. And the reason that we have that team is because we want to provide a comprehensive product suite that's going to meet your needs with feature functionalities, but also to have the team that can support you in utilizing those feature functionalities of those products to the best of their capabilities. So we do have more than 1,300 customers globally. So to give you that confidence in our capability to meet your needs, and those companies range from your small and mid-sized companies all the way up to some of the largest companies in the world. We do offer complete identity and access governance solutions, and I'll cover that at the end. It's just a brief slide, but we do offer full feature functionality when it comes to everything from automating your join, remove, or leave, or provisioning to your access reviews. And in particular, what we're going to talk about today is access risk analysis. So how do you manage risks, in particular cross-application risks, for whatever applications are in scope for you? If that's wherever you are in your journey, if that's Oracle EBS today, and maybe tomorrow it's a mid-transition between EBS and cloud, and in the future it's just cloud-based, or maybe in the future you're going to maintain a hybrid environment. we have the ability to support you wherever you are in that path. Rapid time to value, because we are a cloud-based solution, we can do rapid deployments. Preston will talk about this a little bit just in terms of how quickly we can get you up and running and how quickly we can sync to those applications that you need. And then unmatched ROI, right? Our customers see significant ROI whenever it comes to utilizing our automation as well as our out-of-the-box capabilities in terms of workflows, rule sets for various different applications, things like that, connectors to really get you up and running quickly. So that's who we are as a company, and that's why Preston and I will be talking to you today. Like I mentioned, both of us come from a background in consulting analyst side of the house, so we've got deep expertise in the area, but we now work for the software companies, so it's a little bit easier for us to translate how can the software work for you. So that's what we want to talk about today. So the push for Oracle EBS to cloud transitions, why now? This may resonate with some of you, and we've got the questions open. I'd be very interested for you guys to drop any questions on if you have, or if you're thinking about this journey, if it's in your future, if you're in the midst of it, maybe which of the different reasonings pushed you to make that transition. The things that we're seeing out there in the marketplace, there's a desire to take advantage of the cloud offerings, right? There's additional modules and feature functionalities that aren't always available in EBS that we can get by moving to the cloud. So that is a frequent driver that we're seeing. Additionally, a lower operating costs and higher efficiencies. This is, significantly one of the things that Oracle themselves call out is that by moving to cloud, you can gain those efficiencies as well as recoup those costs. Cost incentives offered by Oracle. They are trying to incentivize everyone to move to the cloud, to manage it on that new stack. So that is part of what is convincing some customers to move. That is helping them with that lowered operating costs. A desire to leverage the entire technology stack. So like I mentioned, the additional features, functionalities, and the continued updates that Oracle are making are really heavily focused on that cloud space, right? So if you want the latest, the greatest, the continued innovation and roadmaps, you can get that with that cloud offering. And then additionally, increase redundancy and improve system up reliability. So depending on what your current situation may be with your Oracle EBS implementation, that may be a driver for you as well. Those are some of them. Like I said, I'd love to hear in the comments if anyone has particular additional reasons, maybe, or questions about reasons you're hearing internally, and if that's something that we've heard additionally as well. We mentioned why some people are looking to implement. The next thing we want to talk about is how. What are the different potential implementation approaches that you can take? And what are successful implementation strategies that you should consider? And that includes the pros and cons of each. So any of these can work for you. Any of these implementation approaches for moving to the cloud can be successful, but also any of these approaches can fail. It all depends on the research that we do in advance and the effort that we put in to make sure that we're taking the best approach that best aligns with how our company's operating. So really, my big thing is I like to give takeaways to people. I like to make a presentation useful, and hopefully there's something you can kind of use as a checklist going forward. So hopefully this can help you out if you're trying to make that decision on which approach is best for you. So I'm just going to go down the list here. The three different approaches we talk about and we called out in our objectives, right, are incremental transition from EBS to cloud. So this is the idea where you're on EBS today and you are going to wholly move over to Oracle Cloud, but you're going to do it incrementally, one component or one piece at a time. So this may be moving a whole component over, it may be moving some of your business processes, but essentially you are slowly, while operating both systems in tandem, moving your feature functionality and your users over slowly onto the cloud. Now, why do some companies choose to do this? A good pro is that it's less resources required because the cutover can be spread out over a longer period of time. So what this means is you can continue to operate with fairly close to, if not, your normal staff capacity. And this just becomes like a project that they are working on in addition to their normal daily duties, but because it's extended over a longer period, we don't have to significantly ramp up our resources and incur a lot of costs that way. Additionally, we can have focused attention on the process that's being cut over one at a time. Because we're cutting over in pieces, we can be solely focused on that piece that's cutting over and really hone in on that and make sure that that goes smoothly. Now, a con of this approach is the complexity over the cutover and maintaining our data in sync within and across applications. So because it is going to be a longer cutover period, it means for the entire time period that we're transitioning and maintaining two application systems, we have to ensure that our data is in sync. So we're opening ourselves up to that risk. Similarly, the cross-application risks while you're operating concurrently. So not only the risk of just maintaining and syncing the data, but the actual risks. So what we're going to talk about a little bit later is separation of duties and sensitive access risks that users have, and how whenever you're operating systems in tandem like this, you need to take into account those risks. And so your broad risk environment by introducing an additional application that's running in tandem. So there's some pros and cons of that. A different approach that you can take rather than an incremental transition of EBS to cloud, you may be doing a net new cloud component implementation. And meaning on EBS today, maybe you run 2 or 3 specific functionalities. And with Oracle Cloud, maybe you're going to introduce entirely new functionalities. So HCM, for example, maybe you don't run HCM on Oracle at all today, but with the new cloud, you want to run Oracle's HCM cloud capability. That would be a net new implementation for you while you still continue to run your old pieces on EBS. Now, why might this be a pro for you? There is a very clear delineation of functionality and business processes across systems. So unlike the first one, where there's that complexity of having to maintain data in sync because we may be slowly transitioning piecemeal processes, in this one, our business processes are very clearly in one system or the other, right? So now we're still transitioning data from one to the other. We're still connected, but the functionality of it that a user's performing, is sitting in one or the other. The whole module is. And then similarly, the system is validated over time, allowing for smaller impacts to business, right? So because we're implementing a net new module and we're running it in one system, we're able to get that up and running and our users to really successfully start utilizing it before we then go and take on the next component that we want to implement. So we kind of get some of those pros of less resources, a slower cutover, allowing our users to acclimate to it, but it's a little bit less risky in terms of that syncing of data. Now, what are some of the cons to this? Potential complexity for system of record for master data. So because you're implementing these new components, are they introducing a new system of record for anything, or are they duplicating anything? Because your business processes are set to exist solely in the separate systems, if there's any data that is like data within both systems, you need to identify what that system of record is. Similarly, again, cross-application risk between systems. You are maintaining 2 systems at the same time, 2 applications, that users may have access to both of them. So we're going to need to take into account any separation of duties or sensitive access risk that could be incurred. And then big bang cutover. This is oftentimes the maybe scariest, but it also has some great pros to it, right? So big bang is when we essentially say on, X day, EBS is completely being turned off and we are turning on cloud, and everyone is stopping using EBS that day and starting using cloud the next, the end, right? Why is that a pro? It's a simplified support of a single application at a time, right? We're not having our team have to support 2 applications. Our users aren't having to switch between 2 applications and remember what lives where. They're just using one. So that's simplified. Simplified risk landscape, right? We're not having to worry about those cross-application, multi-application, SoD, and sensitive access risks. We've just got one application we need to focus on for our risks. So that is also simplified. What are the cons? This can require significantly more resources to prepare and support a cutover. Why? Because if we are wholly turning one system off and the other one on, when we turn the other one on, it had better work, right? So we're going to need a very well prepared testing phase to ensure that all of our master data, all of our system of record information is very, very thoroughly tested and working. And we also need to ensure that for our hypercare period, we have a significant set of resources that are ready to respond quickly and effectively to anything that occurs, because that's the only system we can operate in, right? We don't have a fallback. Similarly, delays in the cutover affect the entire company because we are transitioning all of our resources. into the new system, it's absolutely imperative that that system is up and running in a timely manner, because any delays will affect everyone. So that is some of the strategies we'd say, to consider. Think about the pros and cons. Think about which one fits you and your resources, your needs, your time, your cost, your budget best when you're making that decision. So now that I've kind of level set why you may be considering making this transition to cloud and the different approaches you can take, I talked a lot again about the pros and cons here and how these different implementations can impact risk. I particularly find it valuable to level set with everyone. We may all have different definitions or different nomenclature that we use when we talk about risk. And in this case, when I'm talking about SoD and sensitive access risk, so your risk landscape, I'm specifically focusing here in this conversation around separation of duties and sensitive access risks, and what a transition from EBS to cloud can mean for your risk exposure in terms of SoD and sensitive access risks. With that said, what are SoD and sensitive access risks? For anyone who's less familiar with these, we've got the descriptions here. Essentially, a separation of duties risks is where you have multiple functions that, if executed by a single user, could present a risk to the company. Now, that may be an operational risk or a financial risk. But it is a risk nonetheless, and so we want to be able to report on that and to monitor it. An example is the ability to create sales orders and create invoices, because we have the risk then that a user could create fictitious and fraudulent invoices. I love to use the very straightforward example of create a vendor and pay a vendor. If I, as a user, whether it is within one system or across multiple systems, if I can create vendors and I can also process payments for vendors, I could pay myself as a vendor, whether that is changing an existing vendor's bank details to mine or just setting myself up net new as a vendor with my own banking information and then paying myself. So that's a separation of duties risk, the ability to perform something fraudulent because of a combination of access. A sensitive access risk is simpler than that. This is certain functionalities or activities that in and of themselves are deemed sensitive or critical. This can be things like access to financial information, highly confidential information. So when we think about things like HR, right, who can see certain data within HR, social security numbers or other information like that. Within the system, who can open and close GL periods? Within the IT department, who can open and close the system for changes? Who can transport things directly into production? That is sensitive in and of itself because that is highly impactful access. So that is what sensitive access is. And here's an example of another financial one, the ability to reverse invoices. If we give this to too many people, we're opening ourselves up to risk, because if they inappropriately reverse an invoice, then it can impact our financials, right? These are examples of separation of duties and sensitive access risks. And now that we've kind of baselined that, I think it makes sense to talk through, how do you actually review for this in an application? It's all well and good for me to tell you that take into account SoD and sensitive access risk as you're transitioning from Oracle EBS to cloud, but how do you actually do that? The way that you actually take risk into account is by building what we call a rule set. And we want to build a fine-grained rule set. So how do we do that? A rule set is made up of risks, right? So a rule set would be, let's call it our Oracle EBS rule set. And it's made up of risks like the example we looked at in the last slide, maintain sales order and maintain invoice. A risk is composed of functions. The functions are the two opposing sides. So again, the ability to maintain a sales order is on one side of the risk, and the ability to maintain customer invoices on the other. And then functions are made up of actions and permissions that get us down to the fine-grained level within the specific application. So actions, for example, would be a sales order menu or function and an invoice menu or function. And our permissions would be the actual create or change capabilities within those. So that's how we build a rule set down to a fine-grained level. And the reason fine-grained is so important is because we want to eliminate false positives. If I keep it at just, let's say, the menu level of being able to access a sales order or access an invoice, and I say, okay, if someone has access to this, it's a risk. What if someone only displays? What if they're not actually capable of making any changes? that would be a false positive risk. And now I've taken business and audit time to go in and look at that risk only to validate that it's actually a false positive. So we really want to go down to the fine-grained details, the actions and permissions level, to ensure that we are reporting on our true risk within the environment. So this is how we build a rule set to actually monitor for risk within the environment. Now, cross-application, the example I just showed you was the example of, say, a singular system. How does cross-application or multiple applications in our environment impact how we build rule sets? The good news is having multiple applications and multiple places where we're able to perform functionalities means that we have best of breed solutions, right? We can utilize the best functionality and the best solution that is the best fit for our organization. But what that means is we now have new risks, because maybe part of our business process for our users sits in one system and part of it sits in a secondary system. So just like we were talking about earlier, depending on how you choose to implement EBS and cloud together or implement them in stages, you may find yourself running into this scenario here where part of your processes are in one system, parts sit in the second system. How do you account for risk now? Just like the last example that we looked at, how do we now adjust the risk rule set that we've built so that it's usable within both of these applications and across them, so we can properly report on our risk that users are exposed to? The way we do that, and again, you'll see I kind of take to build slides because I like to, I'm a visual learner, so it helps me to explain it, and hopefully we'll make this concept simple for you as well. How do we build a risk rule set? We start with the same pieces. The rule set is always what we start with. Now it's a cross-app rule set instead of just for a single application, right? The risk is still the same. We still have a risk if we can maintain a sales order, maintain an invoice. That doesn't change just because we're using more systems. It's still the same risk. The difference is in the functions. Each function is going to be sitting in a different system. So on the left, we have the Oracle EBS system, and maybe that's where our sales orders continue to be maintained. And on the right, we have the Oracle Cloud instance, and maybe that's where we're going to maintain our customer invoices going forward. Then when we look at the actions, we'll notice that within Oracle EBS, we're still looking for that menu or submenu around sales orders. But when we look at Oracle Cloud, we're looking at duty roles. We're looking at customer invoice duties. And this is because even though both of these products are Oracle products, the security architecture structure for them is different. And what we need to do is normalize between the two of those, what's the action and the permission, right? So the permissions in Oracle EBS are going to be a function, the ability to maintain. Within Oracle Cloud, we call them privileges. And it's the privileges to be able to create and change, right? So what this gets at is our rule set structure is still the same for cross-application risks. It is a risk with two or more opposing functions, and we need to go down to the action and permission level so that we have a fine-grained rule set. The key is to know what the action and permissions are in each of the applications, because they're going to go by different names. But at the end of the day, they still need to be that fine-grained level so that we're properly reporting on our risk. So with that said, this is how we build risk rule sets, right? I would just add the note here about remembering to include custom actions and permissions as you build your rule set. So I've got background noise again, if someone can mute, but yeah, again, this is how you build a rule set. A lot of different companies, consulting companies, software vendors can provide you with out-of-the-box rule sets for various different applications. But again, I want to give you guys useful and actionable tips. Always customize your rule sets, because if you've built anything custom within your solution, you should account for it in your rule set so that you're properly reporting on all the risk. So the example we see here, Oracle EBS, right? A menu for sales orders and a function to be able to maintain. If you perhaps copied that and created a Z version of it that also allows you to maintain sales orders, you would want to make sure that you're including that additional menu and function in your rule set so that if anyone has that Z version of it, you're properly capturing their risk. And then similar to ensuring that you always customize your rule sets, I just want to leave you with one other piece of advice, which is make sure that you also update your risk rankings. So that's the risk criticality. So when we think about risks, we think about risks being high, medium, low, or critical. And that can dictate how we address those risks, right? Maybe when we do a report on our risk environment, we want no critical risks provisioned out to anyone. And high and medium can be provisioned out, but we want to report on them and we want to have controls in place to monitor and to mitigate those risks. And maybe low, we just report on, but we aren't required by audit to have a control in place, something like that. It can affect those business decisions, how we manage our risk. So we want to make sure that our risk scores actively reflect our organization and how our business processes operate. And I say that because I like to use the example of two customers that I worked for. They both were using the same ERP. They had the same size user base, and they were both in the same industry, manufacturing. One of these customers was manufacturing small handheld items, and one of them was manufacturing porcelain goods. There's a risk to be able to purchase goods and receive them, right? The small handheld goods manufacturer, that was a high risk for them because someone could order goods, receive them, and hide that, and they could walk away with those goods. And so that's shrinkage and can be, very, very costly for the business. Well, the porcelain manufacturer also has the capability to order goods and receive them. However, what they were ordering and receiving was literal truckloads of dirt. Not very easy to steal a lot of dirt, nor is it quite the same impact in terms of cost. So for them, the risk still existed, but it was a low risk for them. So that's a perfect example of why it's so important as an organization, even if you're given out-of-the-box rule sets, but especially as you're creating your own, go ahead and do a risk ranking exercise. And it can be very straightforward. Take a look at your risk, the functions involved, like that example, the ability to order goods and receive them. What is the consequence if that risk occurs, and what's the likelihood it will occur? And so here along the left-hand side, you can see likelihood from 1 to 5, rank it. Is it rare anyone will ever have that access, or is it almost certain? And then think about the consequence if someone was able to do that with no controls in place. Like I could just order anything I wanted and receive it. What's the consequence? Is it negligible dollar value? Is it low, like it might impact my operations, but nothing more, and it's a fairly quick fix? Is it medium, meaning that like I'm going to get dinged for a significant deficiency, but it's not the end of the world? Is it very high, meaning I've got a material weakness that I now have to report? Or is it extreme? I have a financial restatement that I'm going to have to do, right? Think of those two things. And when you rank that risk on a scale of 1 to 5 for both of those, you just multiply it together and you get the number here. So you can rank it from low to medium to high to critical. And what this looks like for you at the end of this score is this. You should have your risk rule set where you have all of your risks defined, the opposing functions, your likelihood, consequence, overall risk rating, and your risk category defined. And what this will get you to is a fully developed risk rule set that includes anything custom in your system. It ensures that the ratings are reflective of your organization's business processes and how your users are set up with access. And what it will allow you to do is to be able to effectively and correctly report on the risk landscape that you have, be that risk landscape within a singular Oracle EBS system, within a singular Oracle Cloud system, or across both of those for as long as you have them both, whether that's during a transition period or if you are permanently operating in a hybrid environment. I hope that was helpful. And with that said, I'm actually going to turn it over to Preston so he can walk you through some examples of how you can do this in a tool, because as you can see, it can be very complex. So while you can do this manually, it is not fun, nor something we would typically recommend due to just the risk of not fully capturing the total risk environment. So I'm going to hand it over to him to walk through some live examples.
Thanks, Carrie. I appreciate that very much. So where I like to start when we talk about how the actual application works is how are we going to grab the data and the configurations that are unique to so many different systems. And so what Pathlock brings to the table is out-of-the-box connections for some of the major applications that exist out there, not only ERP, but as Carrie mentioned a moment ago, some specific best-of-breed processes, things such as Workday, Concur, Ariba, those things that are bolt-ons to process that give us access to other applications outside of our main application stack that give us the ability to do functions that are not visible. So the connector piece, that's our first way of getting all of the data into our dashboard and being able to look across platforms on how things work. The other side of the equation is a specific flat file structure that we implement. So rapid deployment, if we're looking for solutioning very quickly and we want a pulse check on how we're doing in the system, we can actually tweak data out of a system in a flat file format, consume it, load the tables, and work with the data like that. So in those two scenarios, we're able to pull the data straight from the system. And if it's something that is important to you, is an independent uniqueness to your company, we can actually put a development team on and work on an integration point as a project with you. So we're trying very hard to make sure that hit the ground running, pull the data from wherever it's most relevant, either interactively through a connection that we already have, or through simply utilizing your data stack. So on the next slide here, what we're going to talk about is we're going to move through the actual how that data starts to come together on the application dashboard. So go ahead. No? Okay. Just like Carrie had said, one of the things that happens is when we build risk, one of the benefits of the Pathlock product is that we're able to take and normalize activities because the company itself is made up of virtual experts in each of the different major business lines. We know application code, responsibility, function, T code, program, whatever the nomenclature is for a product, we group those into process. And so we know which programs and applications and responsibilities and functions create purchase orders. And we know which ones create receiving of purchase orders. And so we group those together under all of the application stacks and allow you to take that risk and say, it doesn't matter what application we're working with, if it's creating a PO inside of EBS, inside of Oracle Cloud, or in even both of those situations, right? If there's two PO processes going on at the same time, one's for hazmat goods, one's for high value goods, those kinds of things, we can look across both platform sets and build that risk. And we can get right down to the detail of what is that application actually letting you do? Is it letting you create? Is it letting you delete? Is it letting you update, approve? What things can you do? So we can build SoD based on actual process, not just some of the application names that go along with it. And we use those details to give you the visibility to see all of that complex processing. Because as we all know, there's more than one way to skin a cat. Doesn't matter how many different ways you say it, there's more than one way to create a PO in every system out there. And that way we capture that, line it up, put it in that risk bucket that says create PO, and now you can see it across one to many platforms. And so we take that process and we move to the next group and we look at, from a process perspective, what we're going to look at from the detail side is we're going to move to the next slide, please. And we'll go along with that grouping of risk now gives you that single pane of glass, that dashboard for you to look at all of the risk that's out there in your system, utilizing that exact same kind of scaling that Carrie was talking about to see the high, medium, and low risk that are out there. That helps you hone in on the details that are important to you as a company because you've qualified and quantified. We're quantifying. You've qualified what's important to you. We're quantifying where that risk is most effectively addressed in your system. And so that graphing, that dashboard gives you the ability to check on progress, to watch the year over year, month over month, week over week progress as you work through progress and projects. And as that data is worked, you have that health check, that feeling that you're making a downward trend. And anything that changes is available kind of alerting you as a group that looks at that data right off the beginning of your day. And as we move to the next group, what we're going to talk about is sort of the reporting side. So as you are building those analysis that we call them campaigns, as you build the campaign process up and look for risk in the system, you can build that custom risk relationship that goes across multiple applications and very clearly see, I'm looking for the ability to create AP payments and update bank accounts. That means I can create a payment to myself and change that bank account in a system that no one else really sees because we're utilizing an integration point, let's say. But I can see in this risk, I'm checking all three of those applications for that process. I can very clearly understand and filter when I want to look at a particular group of data. I can go straight to an EBS rule set. I can combine rule sets with EBS and Oracle Cloud, JD Edwards, SAP, and I can create that uniqueness that's temporary, right? I can do it as I transition from one system to the next, and then I can simply remove the other application from the system, and there I have now just the standalone validations that go along with the process of completing a project. And so the details themselves, these kind of scorecards pop up as we build risk that give you that visual of where in the system do I get this risk exactly, a long description of what that risk might actually entail, and the opportunity to link into other data sets to look for users, combinations of roles, and even mitigations, opportunity to identify outside of security processes that can handle that risk and can meet the requirements of your auditors. And then as we move from this one into the next slide, what we're able to do then is to not just look at what you can do, but physically track the data of what you did do. We can look at what you've done in the system and where you've logged in and accessed particular aspects of the application stack that you're in. And that then allows us to trigger that relationship between the activity that you've done, creating a customer in this example, and having that identified as a risk. And that risk, if that risk contains that piece of accessibility in the system, you can then have that workflow triggered. We can kick off email notifications, dashboard flags, information that becomes readily available to then direct someone to look into how that activity occurred, follow up and look in the system at what actually happened when that user updated or utilized that activity or combination of activities. That gives you the clarity of, hey, I know we're not supposed to be doing this, but even if someone came in and did privileged access for an emergency situation, or someone came new to the company and was assigned to a role outside of our knowledge base, interactively, that activity is going to kick off risk analysis for you so you can see that in real time. And then as we move forward, what all of that brings us to is the idea that during the cross-application period of your life, one of the things that you want to do is you want to look at all of those different strategies that go along with analysis of risk so that you can minimize that period for which you might have risk exposed in the company. And so that is, you want to be able to understand as you build up a new product and a new application stack, where those applications create SoD within themselves, or where those processes create SoD opportunities or sensitive risk, the ability to create a new vendor or add bank accounts or create payments. Where can those functions occur in the new application? And then take that mapping exercise to say, where do they exist in the old application and where do I cross over? The other idea, and Carrie, I thought did a great job of explaining, is to take the time to customize your rule sets. We have out-of-the-box content as a company that's been merged together with all of our groups of expertise. We have lots of content available. But as one of us said many, many years ago, it is a personal experience for security. You do it a little bit different because it gives you the edge. It's the thing that makes you different, how you process the world. And that uniqueness needs to be customized in your understanding of rule sets so that you're sure that what gives you the competitive advantage doesn't also give you the competitive risk. The other part of the process is bring in those auditors at the beginning of it, right? Be clear about what you're looking for. With a product like this, what you're able to do is include them in the matrix building, include them in the risk design, because we're talking about risk design in terms that are descriptive, not just the technical names of roles and application access. That lets them understand and have a very clear idea of the applications that you're looking for and advise you on what additional customizations you might need to make. The other side of that is, as you transition, one of the things that I've worked with in the last 20 years, all of the companies I have seen, as they transition from testing a new application to accessing the older ones and the new ones, is trying to get through that testing period and giving everybody access to everything. And a lot of times that gets lost in translation. And as you cut over that first week and you do those UATs, and now you're cutting over to production, you've forgotten to take away that testing access. And that's wide open to let anyone do anything they need to do to just get through testing. Making sure that you've checked that in the system gives you the advantage of saying, I've gone from one system of openness to one system of security. And then making sure that you've documented roles and process. You've got role ownerships. You've got people who are taking responsibility for both either users or business lines, or from a role perspective, role owners that can identify and work with the data that you have available to say access is, one, properly assigned to the right user groups, and two, that the content of the role that they have access to is proper as well. And then training. Part of that process of transition is to manage the training side so that the users who work with the system understand what their job functions are and what they can do in the system and why they cannot do other things. Being forthcoming with those user groups to say, look, we're not accessing the bank account information. That's a master data record. The team over there has access to that. Here's the process to make those changes if you need them to done. That gives them a feeling of inclusion and a feeling of ownership, that they understand the process and that there's rationale for why they don't have something they maybe used to have, right? The other side of that is the fact that in seeded roles, whenever applications give you seeded roles, a lot of people that I've worked with, especially in the Oracle Cloud world, have come in and said, hey, we're just using standard out of the box rules. We haven't done anything different with role sets. We were using the standard box. Yes, that's true. The role itself may or may not have some semblance of risk in it. But the minute you combine multiple roles to a user's requirements for their job function, now that's unique to them. And that is a very important thing that needs to be addressed, is how does that user's uniqueness in the company create a unique security opportunity to get reviewed? And then if it's a requirement, mitigate it, remediate it, whatever needs to be done, but document it so that someone on the other side recognizes that you see it. It's important to knowing's half the battle, is the old saying, right? That if you know what you know and you can tell people what you know, then they're impressed with the fact that you've been able to deliver the real answers, as opposed to saying, well, I'm not sure who knows how to update the customer master. And then at the end, sort of the last thing is running this data regularly, right? Building up a project, implementing a project is one thing, and becoming repetitive with looking at SoD and sensitive access. But the big win at this point is if you can keep that in play over a period of time, monthly, quarterly, yearly, depending on the type of access we're talking about. That process ensures that there is never a large gap or never a large opportunity for something to slip through the cracks. I very seriously worked with a company that lost $17 million in product one time, in simply financials, where someone buried money for 10, almost 11 years. Buried money against projects that were just nickel and dimes here and there. And after it was all over, it was $17 million. And that kind of opportunity doesn't exist if you do continuous monitoring. If you're looking for that one change for critical access, if you're running that every other week, every month, the time that they have access to do anything damaging is limited by whatever your appetite for checking is. So I think those kinds of things are important from an overall perspective of what to look for as you transition from one system to the next, whether it's EBS to cloud, or as you bring other applications into your stack for best of breed. With that, I'll hand it back to Carrie and let her take us through the end.
Thanks, Preston. And I loved the way you ended that. I always like to say, to your point about we don't know what we don't know, right? We don't know what we don't know. So visibility is key. Visibility gives us insight into the scope of the risks that we have exposure to in our environment. And what that visibility allows us to do is to implement governance processes that we're going to follow to manage that risk. And then it allows us to secure that risk and to secure our environment against it. So I definitely love using that context when I speak to things that we can do, to better our compliance. So I would be remiss if I did not wrap up really quickly with a slide about what Pathlock does and what we can offer to you. So Preston hit on a lot of this during his review of the various feature functionalities, but Pathlock Cloud does have 3 different products: application access governance, continuous controls monitoring, and cybersecurity application controls. And these cover the breadth of what we talked about today, as well as additional feature functionalities. So application access governance, we do offer access risk analysis, which was the focus of today's conversation. We do that for dozens of applications right out of the box with out of the box connectors, rule sets, etc., to really get you up and running, as Preston mentioned, very quickly, so that you can get that visibility into your environment and your risk exposure. We do also support compliant provisioning, so the ability to provision access with preventative risk analysis checks up front prior to provisioning. So, once you do get a lock on your risk environment and you're managing all your risks, you don't want to introduce new risks without being aware of it. Compliant provisioning can help you to manage that. Certifications, we're great at granting access to users when they're supporting different business processes, but we also want to recertify that they need to retain that access on an ongoing basis, so nothing gets stale and we don't, over provision or give excessive access where it's not needed or not utilized anymore. Elevated access management. Once we get our access risk analysis in play, elevated access management is a great way to take that to the next level. Access risk analysis includes those critical access, sensitive access checks. Preston made the comment that once we have that visibility, we know the sensitive things that people can perform within the system. Elevated access management gives us a functional way to revoke that standing access from users. So they don't have standing access to these sensitive things like opening and closing GL periods or opening and closing an IT system for changes. What we can do is allow them to check that access out through workflows, through approvals for a time-bound period where they can execute what they need to. We log the usage and changes that they perform and report on that for review after the fact, and then that access is revoked at the end of their time period. So we can really take what we find in the access risk analysis reports, and we can further continue to lock down our systems and completely manage our risk there. And then role management, again, Preston kind of hit on this. Roles that come out of the box can be very excessive in what they provide us access to. So having a way to monitor those roles and manage them can be very useful for companies. Continuous controls monitoring, this is that risk quantification piece that he mentioned. Not just can we show you through application access governance what you can do and the risk you're exposed to, but with things like our CCM suite, we can show you what you did do. That can also include things like setting up configuration change monitoring if there's any key configs that you want to report on. He mentioned event-based, right, and notifications, that piece of things. Process control management, so your controls that you're putting in place to mitigate the risks you've identified. If you want to automate some of that management of them to ensure they're operating effectively, you can automate that management of those controls, sending off those reports on a standardized basis for review, that sort of thing, as well as license management, recouping those costs for unnecessary or unneeded licenses. And then cybersecurity application controls, we have this available for a limited number of applications currently. It's ever expanding on the roadmap, but for those applications where it is available, we can do dynamic data masking. We can do vulnerability code scanning, threat detection, transport control, and then your data loss prevention and session logging. So this is really getting at that concept of further locking down your environment. So adding, attribute-based access controls on top of, your SoD and sensitive access reporting and access restrictions that you're doing for your users. So again, just continue to further secure and refine your environment. So that is what we can offer in the way of Pathlock Cloud solutions. And for anyone who's considering implementing a tool or a manual process to address your risks as you're managing these EBS to cloud transitions, these are some valuable insights that we've gotten from the industry as well as from our customer base as we see them automate these functionalities, what do they stand to gain? Everyone within the organization stands to gain something. As we automate, IT is reducing their tasks. And that's because if we are, just in today's example, access risk analysis, if IT is not having to go in and manually pull tables and try to manually review risks and process how those risks might be occurring, we're saving them a significant amount of effort, right? And they can focus instead on more relevant things, supporting the business needs and the business asks for updates and changes to that application environment. Similarly, our business users, right? If they are constantly being asked by audit, for example, to review risks, and if we're doing risk reporting in a way that has a lot of false positives because we're doing it manually or because the solution that we're using is not getting down to that fine-grained level, we're going to be spending a lot of time as business users looking at screens and then having to prove out to audit that that's a false positive and they don't actually have that real risk. So that's a significant amount of our time that we're spending doing that. And so we can recoup a lot of our costs because we're recouping our time whenever we do things like that. And again, there's a lot more whenever we look at the full scope of like an application access governance solution and the cost and time that can be recouped there. But I'm just giving some examples specifically related to today's topic around access risk analysis. And then lastly, internal controls and audit. When we say an 80% risk reduction, what that's saying is that goes back to that statement Preston made, we don't know what we don't know, right? So we are managing risk as an audit and compliance team, right? We're going to manage risk where we've got the processes in place and the reporting in place to see the risk. If we can only see it, for example, Oracle EBS today, but we can't see it for cloud, we can't reduce our risk because we can't even identify all of our risks, right? So by being able to manage all the applications and see the breadth of our risk landscape, we can reduce our risk because we can go in and we can start reviewing those risks for those users, identifying everyone who needs a control associated with them, identifying those where we can remediate that risk through revoking the access because it's unnecessary for them. And that's how we can reduce our risks, because we can prove out that we have fully identified our risk landscape and that we are managing it in totality. So that is what I'll end on today. I'm going to open it up to Stephanie if we have any questions. And again, if you guys haven't dropped any, please do so now. We would love to see if you guys have any questions about what we've talked about today.
Thank you, Carrie and Preston. And with that, yeah, if you do have any questions, please add them now into the questions box on the control panel. Our first question is, what versions of EBS do you support?
Good question. Everybody seems to want to know where we start with that one. So from R11i up into the R12 and all the way through the R12 group, we'll support all of that from that perspective. One of the things that we've done, a couple of clients have worked on previous versions, which seems antiquated sometimes when you think about how many versions there are, but we work with them by utilizing the file extract process where we're taking data out and formatting it and bringing it in a flat file format. So even though our connector's not necessarily tied to anything after or prior to R11i, we can certainly work around that. And from the Oracle Cloud side, it's all of the versions. So I'll just add that in there as we're talking.
Okay, great. Our next question is, how long does a typical implementation take?
We're not recording this, right? I don't have to commit to anything. The answer is it varies, which is not an escape hatch on my part. There is a couple of different things to consider. If you're doing a flat file and you kind of can quickly create that balance, and you can take sort of the pre-seeded rule sets that we have out in the system, you can have results to review and sort of get a pulse very quickly within a week or so. If you want to go into a full project where you're getting into customizing rule sets and you're utilizing the connection piece and we're setting things up all the way across the workflow and things like that, you can get into the month of a project. But it's not, our goal is not to be here for 6 months and to work on the project and continue to sit in your space. Where our goal is to get the data inbound, teach you how it works, hand you the configuration and teach you how it works, and then be there to support you after you're done. So the idea is it's a rapid implementation model so that you have access to what you need to as quickly as possible.
Okay, great. It looks like those are all the questions we have for today. So I just wanted to thank everyone for coming. And if you would like more information, including the latest Kuppinger Cole report, you can. We were named a leader in 2 prestigious industry reports. You can find that at pathlock.com. Or if you have any more questions, you can email us at info@pathlock.com and we would be happy to answer any of those. And with that, I'll just close and say thank you for coming, and we hope to see you again.